Right, today we're going to be replacing a rear coil insulator on a 2007 Saturn Vue all-wheel drive. It's the 3.5 litre, but you can also replace your coils and other suspension components using the same removal procedure. So let's get started. First thing you want to do is break the nuts, secure the car, and then jack the car up. Okay, so break the bolts, jack it up, and secure it on jack stance. We're going to need our jack handy so we can lower the control arm. Now the wheel's off, we can actually see a lot of stuff and understand a little bit about what is going on with the rear suspension and the coil and whatnot. First thing you want to do is just put your wheel under the back there, so if the car drops, it doesn't drop all the way. It's a nice little safety feature. Next little tip, take a jack and just put it underneath this control arm here, which is this large amount of metal, just under the tip, and raise it maybe about that much. That will take the tension off some of these bolts right here and make them easier to remove. We want to undo only 3 bolts. You don't need special tools. 2 18mm ones here, so put a socket on the end and use a box wrench on the nut on the other side, and that will aid taking these off. Use a bit of removal grease, lithium grease, silicone spray, whatever you have. Transmission fluid mixed with acetone is really good for that. Depends how rusty and whatnot your bolts are. And the third and final bolt over here is for this sway bar link, which is this piece right here, that bit there. The sway bar, when you go around corners and things like that, that prevents your car from rolling over. It's also called a rollover bar. It connects to the exact same place on the other side of the vehicle. This linkage here connects the sway bar to the control arm. The control arm keeps the bottom of your tyre on the road, so when you go over bumps and whatnot, the car's not flapping all over the place. That's the rough job of this. The coil sort of absorbs the impacts, and this right here is kind of like the suspension part of that. They all really play together, and if you have symptoms such as uneven tyre wear, it could be a number of things, but each has its own use, and you can sort of try and narrow down the problem from there. The best way is to just inspect the components. The main things that go wrong here are the insulators. As you can see, mine here is totally in half. That's what we're replacing today. It should dampen the coil spring from the frame up here to absorb any impact. What you will get with that is a lot of knocking on the rear end as where the spring makes contact with the bare metal there. So that's what we're replacing. But what you can also do is change out coil springs. If you are changing out coil springs, remember to do both sides and not just one side. Once you've done that, ride the car for a few days so they settle in, and then get the alignment. You will need alignment if you change something such as coil springs. If you can change, say, just this one link here, you won't need an alignment or anything like that. So it does depend what you replace. Today we're going to do the insulators, but the removal procedure for both of them is the same. So what I recommend doing is getting a 13mm wrench and undoing the bottom part of this linkage first. That way when we remove our big bolts here, the thing, and we lower it, the smallest part of this operation isn't holding this whole arm and the load of the spring. So let's get the more fragile element out here first, which is 13mm from underneath. You'll need a deep socket for that, or just a standard box wrench. If you use a box wrench, be very patient. It takes about 5 minutes to get off with the little maneuverability you have. And then we'll tackle these 18mm bolts. Right. Okay, we've taken off our 13mm. Nice little bushing came out with it. Inspect these parts. Any rubber parts, they're the pieces susceptible to weathering and whatnot. So that would be the water kicking up off the road or the heat in a hot environment. This doesn't look too bad. What you tend to get is a lot of cracking in here. If it's like a boot where it's hollow on the inside, you get a rip, and that allows water to get in and wash out the grease or contaminate the grease, or dirt gets in with the grease, and that causes the whole kind of, in some cases, ball joints and things like that to fail. So it's good to inspect all these components. Now we've taken it out, you can see this bit is nice and loose. This is the linkage for the sway bar, so when we drop this control arm, this should just stay in its current position. The next thing we want to do is take out these 2 18mm bolts right here. So get a box wrench on the other side and a socket wrench on this side, and that should pull them right off. So we'll start with the strut one here, then move on to this one. Don't forget to keep your jack underneath to keep the weight, the compression in the spring, so it just doesn't flop down when you're unexpecting it. Okay, I've just freed the strut assembly right here. Just pull it out slightly, so when we lower the arm, nothing's kind of catching and in the way. So you can inspect these kind of rubber little gasket things here. They look pretty good, but they're usually one of the first things to go. Okay, now let's tackle this one. Okay, when you take out that last bolt there, some things may move slightly, but as long as you have your jack under the control arm there, you'll be fine. One of the most dangerous things on the car, apart from sleeping with a bunch of catalytic converters, is coil springs, suspension springs, things like that. You want to be really careful with dealing with those because they are under load and there's a lot of compressed energy in there. So when we release our jack, just do it very slowly and sort of hide around the corner. But you should be fine. So what we're going to do now, we're going to lower the jack and hopefully take the coil out with no problems and replace the parts we need to. Okay, are you ready for this? Hey, no problem, eh? Alright, let's take this coil spring out. Should be somewhat loose. And we'll inspect the damage. Okay, on the car I'm working on, the top and bottom insulators, which are these cool rubber rings which are attached to the top and bottom of the coil spring, are the exact same part. So here's the bottom one. See how dry that is. I mean, technically it's okay, but you know, it's not a bad idea to replace them as soon as you've put the effort in on getting all that off. So I would recommend buying them in pairs and replacing both. Here's the actual culprit. Look at this right there. Oof. So this was the bit actually working here, and the spring was contacting the metal right here. So we're going to replace that today. It's a good idea to make sure your parts are the same before installing. I'll just give you a coil spring a little check. These can actually snap in half or make kind of cracks, and they'll kind of still work as two pieces joined together. So kind of inspect them. You know, it seems pretty solid. I know because this was replaced recently, but it's a good idea to check. Now, before we replace either our coil spring or insulators, it's a good idea just to clean this area out. You get a lot of debris and things, and you don't want your new insulators getting stone indentations in the bottom straight away, so it doesn't get a couple seconds to just clean this out. When removing the spring, don't be afraid to push this right to the floor. You will need a lot of clearance when getting that out. It's pretty flexible, and because this is kind of like on a pivot here, it will be fine. So what we want to do now is reassemble, opposite of removal, once we clean this part out. And yeah, we should be on our way. Okay, so replacement, reversal, putting it all back together is exactly the same really as removal, so I won't go through that, I'll spare you. Good luck. When putting these insulators on, just remember there's a tiny little groove right there where the spring goes in and sort of locks in and whatnot. And then the bottom one goes on the bottom, flip it over, put it in, jack it up, bolts back, you're back on the road. Any questions, leave a comment. Hope you enjoyed it, and have fun. Take care, stay safe, don't get a spring in your face.